everybody to our Wednesday morning class that shall not be named. We're now going on to YouTube, so welcome to everyone who's here on Zoom, and welcome to everybody who is watching on YouTube, both in time and later. We have already with us Larry and Arlene and Ron and Genevieve and Karen and Gail and Carol and Lou, who is just checking in. We want to show everyone all the best for Hanukkah, which is starting tomorrow night. So hopefully everybody have a great Hanukkah. We have an extraordinary number of Hanukkah parties here in Savannah. We've got one at the JA Thursday, our big one Friday. There's a Sunday school one on Sunday, and then Sunday afternoon, the one in the park. And I know you guys are doing in in Sun City, the menorah on the rooftop thing that they mentioned, which is great as well. So what we're talking about today, of course, is very exciting because we talked already about the great Maimonides, one of the greatest sages and certainly one of the, if not the greatest intellect in Jewish history. Again, lived in Egypt for most of his life, although was born in Spain, was a great physician to the Sultan himself, was a great leader of the community, was a great Talmudist and a great philosopher. So pretty incredible guy, very controversial in his time period, as we've mentioned before. Not so much today. Today it's a little less so, but at the time, and as we mentioned, he did a great Talmudic work, or he tried to codify the Talmud, the first person to do it. And then he did this great philosophical work. If he had done them in reverse order, he would have been thought of very differently. He would have been possibly ostracized in many respects, but since he was already considered a great Talmudist, he had the background that he could go into a different place, and that was philosophy. And we're going to talk about his philosophy today, centering on the Guide to the Perplexed. You can actually find the entire guide online. And so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about it. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about is not really controversial today, but 1,000 years ago, or more aptly 900 years ago, it was very controversial in many ways. He doesn't do anything that is outside the Talmud or outside the law, but his perspectives were very alarming to a lot of people. He wrote this at the end of the around 1190, so it was towards the end of his life. But even though they didn't have the ability like we have to send what we write immediately to somebody else, it took longer to get things from one place to another. Both his Mishneh Torah and his Guide to the Perplexed got passed on pretty quickly, considering, and really passed on to both the Ashkenazic and Sephardic worlds during his lifetime. So that was how important his works were considered. I'm sure lots of people were excited to just read them, and lots of critics were like, I need to have it so I can criticize it right now and get my criticism out there. So we talked about him personally. We talked about his two great works and what he did, but now we're going to go into the Guide to the Perplexed, which is a lot more complicated. But as I said, a lot of it today is not so controversial because it has become part of our world. So we're going to talk about it from section to section. If you have questions, obviously, please just let me know. And it's really quite incredible. Now, what we're going to realize is, most importantly, he frames the Tanakh, the Bible, as using and employing as a pedagogical tool metaphor. So that is the most important starter for this. For us, the Bible being filled with metaphors is not such a big deal. Back then, it was still controversial. There were already people who would be talking about this, no big deal. Others, it was very controversial. Also, which sections were metaphor and which were reality. And so for some, certain areas were very simple in terms of believing this is a metaphor, and others were not so. So the Bible has metaphor. The Midrash, which is the extra stories, have metaphor, and the Bible should not be read literally for every single story. And we're going to obviously do a lot with the first story, the creation of the world, and of course, Adam and Eve. So everything is not literal, lots of metaphors, but the metaphors are there for a purpose, and that is to teach. So now, examples. What are some of the metaphors? And he says a lot of them are very obvious. The ones that are most obvious are the ones that refer to God. What do I mean? God talks, God has feelings, God speaks, God moves, God thinks, God says. All of these are metaphors. There's no reference to God that can be anything else. And so what we see is whatever God does is anthropomorphized. I always mispronounce that word, and we still believe that today. It's kind of like putting human traits into somebody else. The creation story is not meant to be taken literally, and it's not necessarily in chronological order, which is very important. This is a man who probably would have been Darwin if he had lived to the 19th century. So the creation story is not meant to be always taken literally or chronologically, which is very important because, as we know, day 1 is light and darkness, and day 4 is the sun. So obviously, even then, they probably realized we're getting light from this giant yellow ball. And if you don't have that giant yellow ball that of course revolves around the Earth, you don't have the giant yellow ball that revolves around the Earth, that is a joke, because as we know, for those of you who are not caught up with recent scientists, the Earth does revolve around the sun. 92% of scientists have said so. So this is all essential to understanding what we're going to talk about later. So stories like Adam and Eve are not meant to be taken literally. That especially goes very deep into the Adam and Eve story and the tree of knowledge, which is one of the center points of his entire belief system, which we'll go into. We'll go into a little bit later. All references to angels are metaphors for natural laws. And all references to God speaking to the prophets are through visions, are metaphors for the vision. So when God speaks, it's not necessarily always God speaking, but metaphors for visions by prophets. In other words, God does not speak as we speak. So when it says God speaks, it doesn't mean God is literally talking to somebody. It means God is expressing God's self, probably in visions to certain individuals or maybe groups. And so any stories that occur during prophecy are just part of visions. Think of Ezekiel. It's not meant to be taken literally. Anything that changes the order of the universe is a metaphor. So in other words, anything that changes the way of except for a few miracles from Moses, through Moses, every other time there's some sort of weird natural phenomenon, it is a metaphor. The ground opening up and swallowing those who revolt against Moses, that may be a miracle because it's connected with Moses, but anything else is a metaphor. So that's essential for us to understand, because that's where the Darwinian belief system comes in. Even though he's pre-Darwin, everything is natural. There's a natural order to the universe. Why would God create a universe that doesn't have a natural order? It doesn't make sense. So anytime God is altering nature, it is a metaphor. except for the few miracles like the Red Sea and that kind of stuff. Now, that's basically chapter 1. That's about the metaphors being used as a pedagogical tool. And think about the stories, Noah and the ark. Is that meant to be taken literally? Every single animal on earth put into one ark. It is not meant to be taken literally. Moses is not there. The Red Sea being divided, is that supposed to be taken literally? Yes, because that is Moses. Now we have to put an addendum on this. What would have happened to people's support of Maimonides if he had said all of the miracles of Moses were metaphors? If he had said, well, the Red Sea didn't really split, that's a metaphor, what would that have done to his reputation? That would have destroyed it. So whether he thought the Red Sea actually was divided or not, he could not say it. Even Maimonides could not say the Red Sea parting didn't happen. Just a few years ago, a pretty prominent conservative rabbi said it didn't happen, and he got roasted for it, even though in scholarly circles, there's a lot of debate. So he would never have been allowed to say miracles didn't happen through Moses. So whether he believed these miracles were miracles were the most difficult issue he had with the Bible and with Judaism. Miracles that, now not the miracles of babies being born or the miracles of love, not those. He had issues with any miracle that went against natural law. So any miracle that went against the natural order. You know, the manna coming from heaven, that is strange. For bread to come from heaven or some sort of food, that's a strange thing.
I still think that's mushrooms.
It could be mushrooms, who knows? The dividing of the Red Sea, the walls of Jericho crumbling down, the talking donkey. These are very abhorrent to him because God creates a natural order. God did not create donkeys with a voice. So what he had to do was explain the miracles of Moses. Well, when God created the world, God put a couple of miracles into the mix for Moses, and that's it. That's how he explained it. It's the weakest point he comes to, but a lot of people use it to explain, well, miracles don't really happen when they go against the order of the universe, except for these few miracles that God put into the mix when God was creating. So the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea, God put it into the creation of the world thousands of years earlier. So for miracles, any miracle that goes against the natural order is it's the biggest problem Maimonides has with Judaism. He does not like miracles. He is anti-miracle. And if he had been allowed to say the Red Sea didn't happen, that's a metaphor, he probably would have. But again, even Maimonides would not have wanted to be that. That would have been almost to the point of, you couldn't kick him out of Judaism. He was too prominent he was a doctor to the Sultan. You couldn't excommunicate him because he was too powerful, but it would have been on the threshold of excommunication, kind of like what happened to Spinoza, 600 years later. So he would never have said that. So that's the first part of the Guide to the Perplexed. Now, the second part has to do with God's self. So the first part is basically metaphors. We could use it. The second part is God. And this is another essential piece to the puzzle because of what he famously says. Now, what he says now is not controversial at all. Not at all. Back then, it probably was. One, obviously, God did not need to be created. So that's essential. God, you have to say that anyway. God did not need to be created. God is an unimaginable concept. That is fairly new at then. What does he mean that? He basically says we cannot understand God except for what God is not. We can't say God is human. We cannot describe God. We do not have the ability to describe God. The only way we can describe God is by describing what God has done. God has no attributes, is not in time or space like we are. The more I say I don't know God, the more I am saying I know God. The people who say I know God and I have conversations with God are the ones who know God the least. Because God is unknowable. Except we can say what God did. God created the world. That's how we describe God. Again, it's not describing God, it's describing God's actions or what God has done. God is limited in some ways in Maimonides' belief system, which is very controversial. What does this mean? God only can do what is logical. God created a universe of logic, and God has to follow the rules God has done. That's where the issues with miracles comes in. That's why he has to say, well, miracles are the exception they were put in at the beginning of the creation. So in other words, Darwinism would fit right in. That's when we said we kind of understand. The idea of the Big Bang would fit right in. God created a means to create the universe. A Big Bang, this is something science can prove. Any science that they don't understand is not a miracle or magic. It just means in that time period in the 11th, 12th century, they don't understand it scientifically. That does not mean they're not going to understand it in the 13th or 14th or 15th century. It's very clear that science will be updated. And that is also controversial to say the Bible is not a scientific book at all. Because science, God gives it to us in the understanding we have. Science is going to get better. And we're going to know more stuff. And so, okay, so this is important. The universe can change. He doesn't say it's expanding. Obviously, he doesn't know that. But he does realize the universe does change, which again does speak to evolution, which obviously he did not understand. What cannot change? Only one thing cannot change, and that is God. God is the only thing that does not change. Everything else changes. So, Larry.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something. I think I showed you this book last
That's great.
time. This is kind of like a little summary of some of the things. And when he's talking about evil in the world, and why did God create a world that has evil in it? And he comes to the conclusion that not all God, but what God did was create existence. So, and he said existence is good. And he says that the only way that it's really a statement, I think, on free will, that basically God creates existence. He doesn't create, whether a person is evil or good, but he says the only way that you can rectify bad things in the world is through wisdom and intelligence.
Right. And we're going to get to that. That's exactly right. That is his last chapter. So exactly.
And how else would you know if somebody really loved you? If you forced them to love you, then it wouldn't be true. If they choose to love you, then that's true love.
Yeah, again, all of these things are true. He is very much a believer in that God created the universe, uses the natural laws, and that all of these things, there's a lot of freedom to our actions. And so this is, I think what you both said is 100% true. Now, other things, again, God uses the forces of nature to manage the world. We don't know God's name. Any name for God we give is just basically, if you say God is love, you're just giving God a name based upon the behavior of God. Because we can't name somebody because God is unnameable, but we can name God based on the understanding of God's actions. We do believe God is good, just, and wise, and that the laws of natures are there to support this belief. But as we looked, and as Larry said very aptly, there's free will, and that is going to be something important. So section 1 is metaphor. Section 2 is God. Section 3 is really nature. That's kind of it's named basically, the first chapter is called The Nature of Nature, basically, and it's about the order of nature. So, and we're going to get into what Larry was talking about as it leads into it for chapter 4. But chapter 3 is a little bit longer. So when it comes to nature, the faith in our nature is not going to change because the laws of nature are there. Will the world change? Yes. Will the laws of nature change? No. The laws have been created. If a law seems to change, what does that mean? It means simply we had the law wrong.
Didn't understand it.
We didn't understand it exactly. So if a theory has been proven and all of a sudden it doesn't work, it doesn't mean nature's changed. It means human beings haven't figured out the real theory yet. And that's, I think, really important. That's him combining his science background, obviously, with philosophy. So everything, plants, animals, humans, are based upon natural life, the natural laws of the physics, of chemistry, and that is essential. He also believes that our existence is basically good. Why? Because even though the creation story is a metaphor, God saying it is good is not. God saying it's good is that's not a metaphor. That's literal to him. So the laws of nature are there. They're perfect. They work. Obviously, he didn't understand why, but I am not falling off the planet. I am walking on the planet for some reason. I mean, he didn't understand why, but he understood that there are laws to this. Now, the intellect also follows the laws of nature. And our intellect and consciousness is also based a lot on our body, but not solely. He understands there's physicality to our brain and hearts. There's some biological. So there will be certain things. Also, the body's impact on the mind is foremost in his mind as well. He is very, very much a believer that the body is a problem. The body impacts the mind, but not generally in ways that it shouldn't. It impacts the mind for good and for bad. If we're physically feeling good and we're in a good state of mind, our intellect is going to be better or more precise. But as our body, and it's not just our brain, if we're injured to our brain, it's obvious, but an injury to the rest of our body affects our brain and affects our intellect. If I'm in pain, I am not going to be able to think in the way I should. If I have been injured or if I have emotional issues with my family or I'm worried about my family's health, it is going to impact. If I'm hungry, something as simple as hunger will impact my ability to think. Lack of sleep. Everything with the body affects the intelligence. And that's why he is, as I would give this analogy, If all of you, I think I've done it before, if you've ever seen Star Trek, there's an episode where they go to a planet and they find a race of beings that have become so far beyond their bodies that they're basically just heads in glass cases. Because all they do is think. That's all they do. For Maimonides, that is perfection. Just not having the body, just being able to think. That is perfection. So the body is limiting. What is really impressive about his science is that he believes the universe started at a single point, and then everything then began to develop afterwards over time. Is that freaky or what? This is the Big Bang Theory is not till the 20th century. This is the 12th century. And he thinks the world was created in a single point and then continued to develop over time. He's not speaking of evolution. That's way before evolution, way before Big Bang. He's using what he sees in the Bible as a basis for his belief in science, even understanding it is still a metaphor. It is really quite incredible to think that somebody is thinking this in the year 1190. It's almost unbelievable. This is now, of course, it's millennia plus after Aristotle, and Aristotle is his guy. So he has access to Greek thought and science, which was way ahead of where the Christian world was at this time, but he is living in the very enlightened Muslim world. So now, he does believe that the world was created in chaos and then that God shaped it. He doesn't know why, but he does know there's randomness in the universe. Wow, is that still part of the Big Bang Theory? Almost. So we see this in the beginning of Genesis where the world was null and void. He believes that may have been chaos, possibly, that the world's creating chaos and then God shaped it. Like he still believes God can create out of nothingness, which is an exception to what we can do. So there is randomness. He doesn't know how the world was created. He doesn't understand. Why does he not know how the world was created? It's not because human beings can't understand it. It's because in the year 1190, human beings could not understand it. And that's a really important fact that we've mentioned here. We now have the ability to go back in time to like the millisecond before the world was the Big Bang. So we can go back 15 billion years now with our science, but they couldn't back then, obviously. All right. Now, what is a little different from science is his belief in Judaism, obviously. So he believes commandments are essential, and the mitzvot are essential to the body and mind and the long-term well-being of our sense. So the commandments give us ideas, character traits, and improve society. So in other words, the commandments from the Torah are mixed in with science. The commandments help us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. God is good, and the commandments help us with our long-term well-being. Obviously, we can still get sick if we're following commandments, but by following commandments, it makes us better human beings, which helps us in every way. But he also understands there's randomness. Gail. And you're on mute, by the way.
Sorry. This is more general in a way. I know that there are Christian faiths that believe in the Bible literally. Are there Jewish sects that believe in the Bible literally as well?
That's a great question, and it's a really ironic one, because there are more Jewish people who probably believe in the literal Bible today than there were probably 1,000 years ago. And that is ironic. What you have today is these ultra-Orthodox groups that have gone back in time and have decided to get rid of science and make the Bible literal, even though 1,000 years ago, Jews really weren't doing it as much as they are today. So the irony is we're more scientifically knowledgeable today than ever before. And there are groups of Jews who have gone the exact opposite way and have gone away from the metaphors that Maimonides didn't invent the idea that the Bible was had so many metaphors. He added that there may be more than we think. But it's been a belief that the Bible has metaphors since the beginning. So it's ironic. If you go to Israel today, I know they had an article about a guy who was undercover he went undercover as an Orthodox guy going to one of these schools. And one of the professors was making fun of, oh yes, human beings come from monkeys. As you can tell, we're all looking like monkeys, and making fun of evolution as if it is the dumbest thing that ever happened, that God obviously created us exactly as we are today. So yes, there are still people today who believe in the Jewish world, but traditionally it's much less so. It's kind of ironic.
So in Israel, is the proportion greater, or do you know that?
Oh yeah, much smaller. So Israel is mostly what we call secular, and so there's only about 15% of Israel that's Orthodox, and not all of them are ultra-Orthodox. So we're probably talking 5 to 7%, but it's growing, maybe 10%.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big fear for the future of Israel once those people get in charge of the science academies. So the mitzvot are essential. God works through natural order, so do commandments. So the commandments we have are natural. They're natural economically. They give us the incentive to be helpful. So when it says, you need to have proper weights, that is basically nature as well, God trying to teach us to be good human beings. Because of the randomness, not all of us are thinking the ways we should. That's why we have the rules to follow. That's the whole choice thing. You can't have a commandment or mitzvot and not give us the option to not follow them. Otherwise, we're no longer human. We're robots. So if God gives us commandments and we automatically follow them, then humanity doesn't exist at all. So
Right.
so we have to have the ability to not follow them, or they're not considered good. If it's automatic that we follow them and we have no control, then mitzvot are not good.
Right.
Yes, Larry.
We say the prayer Yigdal, the 13 principles of faith. Now, he's responsible for writing that, right?
Yes, he is.
And it seemed, did he write that before or after he wrote the Guide for the Perplexed?
I believe he wrote that way before. I'll have to check that. The Guide for Perplexed was one of his last.
Okay.
Let's see. We can see when Yigdal was.
Because it seems to me that there's so much in there that is very fundamentalist as far as in the 13 principles, which we say actually even in the Reform Synagogue, right? We
did he? I thought he wrote Yigdal. I know that it's based on the 13 principles. Did somebody else write it? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. He didn't write. Sorry, my bad. He wrote the 13 principles, but it was based on somebody else wrote the actual song. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
When did he write so it's when are the 13 principles? That's what we're asking. And that was written beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah. But those 13 principles are very, very faith-based. They sound almost fundamentalist in that it's a little strange when I hear those, in a Reformed temple.
Right. Well, you have to understand Maimonides walked a tightrope between religion and science. And when he talked about science, he did it from a religious perspective. He never did it from a purely scientific perspective. Whether he could, he probably couldn't anyway at that time period, being in the Jewish world, he probably couldn't, but he probably didn't believe that. He probably believed science and faith are combined. There's no separation to him. There's no separation in Judaism. Science and faith are the same. I mean, they're intertwined.
Even Einstein believed that.
Yeah, Einstein did too. And he believed it more and more as he got older as well. A lot. Maimonides, because Einstein was purely a scientist, he had a lot more leeway than Maimonides did, because Maimonides was a religious leader as well. So he had to combine it, but that's what he believed. I think that's pretty obvious. He believed commandments were part of the natural world, and that God gave them to us so that we could improve our minds and bodies spiritually. And he believed that intellect or intelligence or learning, both scientifically and philosophically and religiously and ethically, all helped. That's what he's supporting, the idea that, and it's really a beautiful way of combining. Nobody else has ever combined the two as well as him. And again, combining the Bible with Aristotle in many ways is what he did. So so that's why we're still talking about him today.
Well, where did he live when he wrote this?
He was living in Egypt. He lived in Egypt. So he was born in Spain during the golden age of Spain, but it was a particularly difficult moment and for Jews in Spain, because they had brought some warrior tribes from North Africa to help them fight the Christians. And that warrior tribe was not as supportive of the Jewish world, and they actually took over for a while. So he moved first to Israel with the family, but Israel was, of course, a very backwater, nothing place. It was a holy land, but there was nothing there, and they realized they couldn't really make a living in fodder. And so then they moved to Egypt.
So it was published primarily, you think, for the Jews in Egypt at the time?
No, I mean, it was, excuse me, it was not. It's the opposite. It was published for everybody. He published it in a Hebrew, as opposed to the Mishneh Torah, I believe, so that everybody could read it.
And then it was disseminated into the Western world? Exactly.
Well, again, even the sages of the Ashkenazic world, could read Hebrew. So it wasn't hard for them. Yeah.
This was pre-Gutenberg, right?
Yes. Wait. So, no, sorry, I got confused. The Mishneh Torah was written in Hebrew. This was the one written in Judeo-Arabic. Yeah.
In Arabic.
It was Judeo-Arabic. So basically, Hebrew using Arab letters. So my bad, I got confused between the two. It was translated very soon afterwards into Hebrew, though. But it was, again, this went. You have to believe that Maimonides knew everybody's going to read it. His Mishneh Torah was read by everybody and critiqued by everybody. So he knew whatever he was. And it's also important, he wrote this at the end of his life. He's a little wiser. He's really proven himself, so he can say things that not everybody can say. And he knows, the repercussions, because he's probably going to pass in the next 20 years. He won't have to live with the repercussions for the rest of his life if it goes wrong. It's not quite Copernicus, who announced that, the world, the sun, we revolve around the sun right before he died, so we'd have no repercussions, but it wasn't, as bad as we saw for other folk who had these type of, viewpoints. Galileo, for instance, would be an example. I'm sorry?
20 years is still a long time to put
Yeah,
up.
he didn't know how long he was going to live.
Right.
He was old, at that age, but these older guys kind of getting the retired world, he probably felt like I can take it now. And much more so and it's also a lot easier, it's a lot easier to say things when you've already proven yourself. If you're a Nobel Prize winner, you can have a little bit more leeway on saying something what is a little controversial. And people are, well, you won the Nobel Prize. It's Maimonides. He wrote the Mishneh Torah. He knows his Talmud better than anybody else. This is not an ignoramus. This is one of the great Jewish minds of the age. So he's writing philosophy. That's very nice. For the people who didn't care for it, they're like, oh, that's so cute. He's writing philosophy. It's like, what's the famous singer? What's the most famous? Garth Brooks. And then all of a sudden he did this one weird album where it was like a rock album, and he gave himself a different identity, and he combed his hair the wrong way. And everybody likes, it's okay. It's Garth Brooks. Let him have some fun. So for those who are not inclined towards philosophy, it was a nice, cute side thing. but for those who were more interested in it, it was great. But, he already had the Mishneh Torah, so he's already got the reputation. So for the last chapter is a little bit more of what Larry was mentioning. And again, important to realize as well, he didn't believe in free will. I mean, mitzvot help us become better human beings, but God does not miraculously change us to follow them. That is not whether, and he probably doesn't even believe God can do it, or for sure God won't do it. Now, what is the center of all of this, of course, is chapter 4, which Larry spoke so beautifully about. Chapter 4. So chapter 1, of course, is metaphor. Chapter 2 is attributes of God. Number 3 is nature. And number 4 is the power of intellect. And this is where he believes intellect helps us understand the world, helps us understand God, helps us do mitzvot. But he also believes very aptly that we use our intelligence to understand things. So when we make conclusions, it should be on data, observational, calculated data. So that's what it should be based upon. So in other words, when we read the Torah, we should read it from the point of view of our intelligence, not just believing it literally. And our intellect determines how successful we are. Now, not everybody has the same ability. Not everybody here is a Maimonides, but most people have the ability to improve their intellect, to use it in ways to try and understand the world, to be better human beings. Our moral sense comes from our intelligence. We do have animal nature to us. We have cravings and instincts, but the intellect is what balances us and should be stress.
Also, it helps us, and if we know more about other cultures, it helps us be more compassionate.
Exactly. Prophecy is about logic as well. If you're going to look at prophecy, look at it from the intelligent, what God intellectually wants us to do. Our imaginations, all of these things are connected to our belief system. And so intelligence is the center of our being. It's the Spirit of God in us. In the creation story, when God says human beings were made out of God's image, what does it mean? Do we look like God?
No.
No, it means the intelligence. That is what separates us from animals. Animals have similar abilities physically. They can run, they can jump, they can hunt. They do not have the intellect that we do, which is really important to understand in many ways. Animals cannot change what they eat except out of necessity over time. If a lion doesn't have things to hunt, it's not going to immediately start eating grass. It may over time be able to do it, but it's a very disruptive force. Whereas for me, I have to decide between Chinese food, Japanese food, Italian food, all kinds of food. Each culture decides the food for itself based upon what's available, but also based on what's coming in and what we can do and what we travel. If I'm tired, I can control that urge to sleep and stay up and watch a movie way too late in the night for no apparent reason, even though I'm exhausted. Whereas an animal, if it needs to sleep, unless there is some fear factor, it will sleep. A predator does not miss sleep. A hunted animal could, but only because of fear. It does not refuse to sleep because it wants to watch TV or read a book.
Interesting.
We crave so many things with our bodies, but we can learn to control it. Ron.
Yeah, I have a question. You said, do we look like God? And then
Only,
Genevieve-
well, if we're going to take
and
one
Genevieve-
physical person to look like God, it's Ron.
And Genevieve said no. But let me ask Genevieve this question. How do you know that? God created us in his image.
I think that in my opinion, I think that means he made us creators. That's why we're able to create things and all. I think because he is a creator, he created us as creators, in my opinion.
And again, you're right, Ron. There's no way to know. We can't know God. For all we know, God is a giant person and the universe is a marble that God is holding in God's hand. We don't. But God gave us the mind to think on these things. God gave us the mind to search for answers, and that's what we're doing. Searching for answers in all venues. So that is what we would say, that we don't believe God has the body of human beings, but we can't prove it because we can't prove what God is. We can only prove what God does. Yes, Ron. Larry.
Yeah, we're just starting to learn about the limits of the universe through things like, Voyager travel and the Hubble telescope and things like that. And some astonishing things are coming out of that as far as, for example, the number of suns out there is just unbelievable, and they believe that every sun has planets that are rotating around it, which may or may not look anything like ours or anything. And just statistically, if you look at the numbers that people say, there are different forms of life that may be, present, on one of these things. I mean, if you're looking at things that are now data driven, it does kind of drive a wedge into your idea of, God created, our world and our world alone, with other things that are being created out there that we just don't know about. So it's just very, very, we're at just the beginning of understanding, of what's really out there in this. When you say the world that Maimonides knew was very limited to
Right.
What he was able to see up in the sky, probably even before telescopes were invented. But now, of course, we could see so far out into space and still don't understand what's happening, except
That's
some
exactly right.
science fiction movies. I just wonder what he would think today.
I think he would be like a kid in a candy store today. All this, so yeah. So I think you're exactly right, and we can't prove. You can't prove anything about God. What we do, as you said, we've been given the intelligence to search, and so the last part of the document is, about a discussion on, we use our intelligence to make predictions. That's what intelligence is. That we can understand order and that we observe there's order in the world. And as we learn more about the world, we're going to see more order, which is true. We now understand evolution, gravity, things that really, in medicine, we understand antibiotics. The idea that to help me resist something bad, I have to have a little bit of that bad stuff in me.
I was gonna say at one point we didn't understand the fermenting process. They would just pick up fermented fruits and get drunk. And now we actually make it.
Exactly. And this is all about order and testing and the scientific method, but it also connects with our goodness. We can learn goodness by practice, by understanding, by thinking about it, by understanding the order of the world. So that's what all is intelligence. And this is all about the connectiveness. Now, they go into specific stories. Obviously, the one speaks often about, of course, is the Garden of Eden. So that's, the tree of knowledge. What was the tree of knowledge? Some would say it's intellect, but Maimonides doesn't believe that, because Maimonides believes we're inherently have been given intelligence. So what is the tree of knowledge? The tree of knowledge to him is something very different. We are giving the intellect. That's the basic components, of what we have. Ethical norms. That's what we're given. We have our senses. But what is the tree of knowledge? That is, more specific ideas about ethics, the ability to go out of our way. It's about aesthetics, to understand the beauty of the world. And that the world it's a higher understanding of concepts that we acquire through intelligence. So it's almost like we're born with intellect, but we get an appreciation of the world. That's what the tree of knowledge is.
Would you say
I
that
remember. Oh.
is it? Oh, excuse me. Would you say that God did not want us to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge? And
Now,
which is kind of a paradox, because we're all along saying, according to Maimonides, intellect, and yet here is that a commandment? Is that one of the 613 that we're not supposed to eat? Because it could be almost interpreted as a commandment. Don't eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. And yet, we're wondering, why didn't he want us to have that knowledge?
Yeah, and again, did God not want us to have knowledge? Did God not want to have the knowledge yet? Did God want us to we weren't supposed to get the Garden of Eden until we wanted to have it, and we did. But it also proved that human beings can make mistakes. So again, that's all true. So some spend their time discussing why we did it, and others spend their time discussing, well, what did we get? What did we get from the tree of knowledge?
Supposedly, women got the pain during childbirth. Is that one of the?
That is close.
How did that come about?
That is not from the tree of knowledge. That is the punishment for taking a fruit from that bush. So when they ate the fruit, a woman did not get birth pains from that. That is the punishment God gave for woman and man. They were kicked out of the garden. The punishment was getting kicked out of Garden of Eden. Eating the fruit didn't mean they had to leave the Garden of Eden. I mean, inherently, it meant the punishment for eating it was. It may, a lot of people believe it was probably inevitable that we were going to do it, and our knowledge would grow, that we would have more of appreciation of the world, that our intellect would still be there, but it could go in new waves and new creative ways.
It's like a child. Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're right, Genevieve, please.
I was just thinking it could be like a child, like, that innocence. And then once you gain certain knowledge, the good knowledge comes, like they say, ignorance is bliss. So with the good knowledge of knowing the universe, then you also know more bad. You're more aware as possibly. And I remember when I first came into the synagogue, I struggled with the window that said, I think it was like, a happy man is the one who fears God. And I remember when I first came in there, and I was just like, why? Why would you have to fear God to be happy? And then it was only like, I guess recently, or fairly recently, that I was like, oh, duh. Because if you fear the consequences, then you won't do dumb things.
That's one way to look at it. Other would be, say, be in awe of God is another translation. Like, it doesn't, fear doesn't have to be like, Freddy Krueger fear. There's fear of the overwhelming. I mean,
like a fear of a parent, like letting a parent down.
Right. That's one fear. It's also like, I think about the cosmos, the universe, and I'm like, even thinking about something that big is really scary. I mean, it's to think about, the earth is pretty big, but then you think of the cosmos and you think about, well, there's more stars than there are sands of, grains of sand on our planet. That's an overwhelming awe. And so that's in many ways what fear is, but it is also fear of not following the mitzvot, a fear of not doing what you're supposed to do. Yeah, so these are all, this is all, as you can tell, it's really beautiful stuff. He wrote it so people could debate it, but also that people who were not as intelligent could understand some of it. He believed that everybody could increase their awareness and use intelligence for good, some people more than others. But it's, he obviously was a little bit more biased towards people who are really smart in many respects. But, he is Maimonides. So, and so we'll finish with that unless anybody has any questions. And I'm going to go to what we're doing next week. So next week, and I had it up, we were going to do, I don't know if we were talking about, I just closed it on, there we go. All right. We're talking about doing the Mishneh Torah next. If we want to continue with Maimonides and then doing witchcraft, is that what people want? Is that what people want? So we just did the philosophical. We're doing the opposite. And then, did we do the Mishneh Torah last time? We did. We just talked about Maimonides, right? Did we do the Mishneh Torah already? I don't think we did.
I don't think so, no.
I have his Maimonides bio. Then we were gone.
Right.
22nd, and then the 27th. That's right. I was not here because of the funeral. All right. And the 29th.
Oh, I'm curious about the Tanya. So, it doesn't in the
About who?
future. The Tanya. Maybe I'm saying it
Tanya.
wrong.
Yeah, we can talk about that as well later.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm wondering also if we could throw Hillel into the mix
All
sometimes.
right.
in the future.
We could definitely do, if we want, we could go into we could talk about Tanya. Definitely, we could talk about Hillel after witchcraft. We could, we could do like Tanya, and then we could do bios of great Jewish leaders if we want, great Jewish sages.
Yeah, that list we generated a few weeks
Oh yeah, we
ago.
could go on bios on the list. That's a great
Right.
idea.
Remember
Yeah,
we
good
talked
job.
about exploring some of those
Yeah.
people.
My mind sometimes. So we'll
No,
then,
no. Do you have the list, Rabbi? Because
I
I
do
think I
have
have it.
and would you send it to me just in case?
Yeah, I have. I have it somewhere. I'll find it.
Well, we could go into we could do biographies for a long time if we want to do some of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rabbi, I'm sure you're familiar with something called Law of the Pursuer.
Uh-huh.
Have you heard of that?
I don't know if I've heard it in terms of how I understand.
Because I just happened to be reading this film I just got out called
I may not understand it at all.
This is about the death of Rabin, the assassination of Rabin.
Well, it's a Jewish law, but so it may be the same one then. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a Jewish law, which
then that one I understand.
Is used, and it was used in the trial by the person who killed Rabin, the murderer, this fellow Yamir, I think it is. The film is kind of biographical, and it does reference this law of the pursuer in there about the fact that, and I believe there are elements, and he used it in his defense in killing Rabin, that because of the Oslo agreement, he was giving up land and he was giving up what he believed was holy land, that he was justified in killing. So
yeah, that's why the rule you're talking about, that's why it became famous, is because of Yigal Amir. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's quite a movie, and it's
what's the name of the movie?
Incitement.
Okay.
Incitement, which perhaps one day, if you wanted to, we could even show it at the on a Sunday afternoon or something in the synagogue or something.
Yeah, basically it's if you're a rodef, if you're the pursuer and you do something you're not supposed to do, like kill somebody, there may be allowances that you could actually get the death penalty for that. But then you can also say, well, maybe I had legitimate reason to pursue somebody because that person was going to kill somebody. That's
right.
That's how he got kind of. There's no death penalty in Israel except
he's life in prison now, I guess.
Yeah, but he is a cult figure. He has women who love him and want to marry him. He's supported. People come to study with him. He is a
Well, he was a follower
hero.
of this
It's a very
Baruch
strict-
Goldstein, also the fellow
Yeah.
that
Him
became
too.
patriarch, one
Disgusting.
who assassinated like 80, I guess, Muslims while they were praying, and the Koch movement, which I think was been banned now by Israel, right? The Koch movement.
Yeah, Kahana
Yeah,
was.
Kahane. Yeah.
Yeah, his movement was that was a year like 25 years ago. He was more so. He was an
But
American.
they bring in a
guy.
very in the movie here. They bring in a very young Prime Minister Netanyahu, and you hear some of his vocal statements, even at a very young age, about some of the things that he's talking about. The Oslo has been a betrayal and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a very difficult one. If you know somebody's going to kill somebody, it's your responsibility to stop them, and even if you have to kill them. But again, it's always hard to know for sure someone who's going to do it and who says they're going to do it. Yeah.
But here you're not stopping them. You're basically they're using it as a defense to say that since this person is a traitor, we're obligated to
Rabin was going to kill somebody. Basically, Rabin was going to kill somebody,
right.
So it was okay to kill him.
Yeah.
And what's a shame is it really did help to derail the peace process in the 90s, and the repercussions are still around today. I don't think it stopped it. I think he was probably going to not win the next election. He had a good chance not to win the next election anyway, but because of Arafat, but who knows? All right, fantastic. So next week, now we're going to have one week we're not going to have. So we will have class the next couple weeks, but the last Wednesday in December, I'm out. So I'll have class 13th and 20th, and then we won't have class this 27th, and we'll have it the 3rd, if that's okay.
Okay,
All right.
sounds good.
Awesome, guys. You guys were amazing.
Thank you. Wow.
I know it's a little hard to wrap your head around Maimonides in 1 hour, but especially the Guide to Perplex. But again, he did it succinctly in many ways to make it accessible to those it may not have been in other books. So fantastic, guys. Thank you so much. And as for announcements,
Take care, everybody.
5:30 on Friday, Hanukkah party here for kids and adults. It'll go to about 7:30. It's going to be food and games like menorah. If you want to come later, the 6:30 to 7:30 part will be a little bit more adult-like. We're going to have a DJ, sort of. DJ, Big D, and Big and Little E. That's Jason, who's our tech guy, who's Big Daddy. And Little E is Ellie, his daughter. And they're going to be pretend DJs. So it should be a lot of fun. And Mark Friedman is coming in to make the latkes. So we will have our super awesome latkes.
Only on Friday?
Only on Friday. I think we may.
Not on Saturday?
On Saturday, we will not. I don't, there may be leftover. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing Saturday. That's a good point.
Okay.
I think Sun City is having something tonight.
Is that when you're doing the thing with the menorahs?
Sun City is having something tonight, and I think Saturday night in Bluffton.
Tonight or tomorrow
They're
night?
having a menorah
tomorrow?
lighting tonight.
I think
That's
the
tomorrow
menorah
night.
thing is on Sunday. Somebody told me, or you told me.
It's a lot of things going on that Chabad is doing also. So
Yeah, that's what I meant.
a lot going on.
Forsyth this Sunday.
That's our Chabad, but there's also Chabad in
Yeah.
Sun City. They're doing something, I think, on
Well,
the
they're-
same
yeah.
day.
He's
So we
having
don't-
one thing in Beaufort Friday night and another night in
I didn't feel as
Hilton
comfortable
Head.
promoting the Sunday thing in that area with Chabad because they're already doing something here, and
right,
I
right.
don't think they like to compete against each
Right.
other. So, all right, guys, fantastic. Hope to see you there's also the Klezmer concert at the JA tomorrow night, 4 to 6.
Ah,
And
okay.
Saturday will be at least, I don't know what we're doing for lunch, what we're doing for Hanukkah on Saturday. We'll see. And remember, please go onto our website. You'll see the list of presents that have been suggested, be given to your rabbi. All right, guys, happy Hanukkah.
It's like a Hanukkah registry. Is that what it
That's
is?
exactly it.
I
Okay.
thought it was a hard time.
Hanukkah what? Hard drive?
No,
It's
registry.
a
Oh,
hard time. Oh,
Yes.
I was saying that you get a hard time for Hanukkah.
Our time for Hanukkah. Guys, have fun. I will see
thank
you.
you so much. I feel like my
Thank
brain
you.